For days before our anniversary, a stranger knocked on my door and told me my wife had slept with her ex. I thought that would be the worst moment of my life. I was wrong. My name is John. I was born in Ohio, raised mostly in the Midwest, and by the time this story began, I was 36 years old. I worked as a project manager for a regional construction firm. Nothing glamorous, but steady. I had a graduate degree I didn't talk about much, a mortgage in a quiet neighborhood, and a reputation among friends for being calm, dependable, and maybe a little too forgiving. I believed in long dinners, planned vacations, showing up early, and fixing problems before they became emergencies. I had been married for 6 years. I thought I knew who I was. I thought I knew who my wife was too. When people ask now what my marriage was like before it ended, I usually say it was ordinary. Not in a dismissive way. In a way I once found comforting. We weren't dramatic. We didn't fight loudly. We paid our bills on time. We hosted barbecues. We had routines that fit together without much effort, like two pieces from different puzzles that happened to line up well enough to pass. I met Claire when I was 29. She was smart in a practical way, worked in communications, had a laugh that came out before she could stop it. She liked structure, but pretended she didn't. She liked wine, but rarely finished a glass. She had an ex she mentioned early on, casually, the way people do when they want to show they have a past but don't intend to live in it. His name was Evan. At the time, I didn't register him as important. He was a college boyfriend, long distance at the end, ended badly. That was the summary. No red flags. No lingering bitterness. Just a name filed away with others that don't matter once life moves forward. We married 3 years later. Small ceremony. Close friends. Parents on both sides smiling the way parents do when they think something stable is being locked into place. Our anniversary was always a quiet thing. We treated it like a shared secret rather than a performance. This year would have been our 7th. We had reservations at a restaurant we both liked. Nothing trendy, just reliable. We talked about maybe planning a bigger trip the following year. Europe, maybe. Somewhere with trains. For days before that anniversary, a man I had never met knocked on my door. It was a Tuesday evening. Early fall. The kind of evening where the light lingers longer than you expect, making everything look more forgiving than it really is. I had just gotten home from work. My jacket was still on the back of the chair. I was debating whether to cook or order something unhealthy and call it balance. The knock wasn't aggressive, just firm, deliberate. I opened the door expecting a delivery mistake or a neighbor needing a favor. The man standing there looked uncomfortable, just existing on my porch. Mid-30s, maybe. Clean clothes. Eyes that didn't quite know where to land. He said my name like he was checking pronunciation. I said yes. He asked if Claire was home. I said no. He exhaled, like that answered a question he'd been afraid to ask. I'm sorry, he said. This is going to sound strange. That's how it always starts. He introduced himself as Mark. He didn't offer his hand. He kept his arms close to his sides like they might betray him. He said he didn't know the best way to do this. That he'd gone back and forth all day. I remember noticing the sound of a lawnmower somewhere down the street. A dog barking once. Normal life continuing behind him. I think your wife slept with my brother, he said. Not loudly. Not accusingly. Just like he was stating a fact he didn't want custody of anymore. I didn't respond right away. There's a delay that happens in moments like that. Your brain tries to protect itself by pretending it misheard. He kept talking. He said his brother, Evan, had been acting off. Defensive. Too quiet. Then drunk and honest in a way that wasn't flattering. He said names came out. Dates. A hotel near the airport. He said. I didn't believe him at first. He looked at me then. Really looked. Like he was checking if I was going to punch him or shut the door or fall apart. I'm not here to cause trouble, he said quickly. If it were me, I'd want to know. I asked him when. He hesitated. Then said, 4 days ago. I did the math without meaning to. That was Friday. Claire had said she was visiting a friend that night. A coworker who'd just moved apartments. She came home late. Tired. Normal. I thanked him. I don't know why. Reflex, maybe. Politeness clinging to relevance. He nodded like he didn't deserve it. Then he left, walking faster than necessary once he reached the sidewalk. I closed the door and leaned against it. The house felt different immediately. Not hostile. Just unfamiliar. Like someone had moved furniture an inch to the left in every room. I didn't call Claire. I didn't text her. I stood there for a long time, listening to the quiet settle back in. That night, I didn't sleep. I replayed the past week in fragments. Her tone, her timing, the way she'd checked her phone face down for once, the way she'd kissed me goodbye Friday morning like she was already late for something. By morning, I hadn't cried. I hadn't yelled. I had simply arrived somewhere I didn't recognize. Claire came home from work around 6 the next day. She smiled when she saw me, asked why I was so quiet, told me about traffic. I told her someone had come by. Her face changed before I finished the sentence. Not guilt exactly, more like calculation, like she was deciding which version of herself would walk into the room. When I said Evan's name, something broke loose. She didn't deny it. She sat down hard on the couch like her legs had made the decision without her. She said it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything, that it was closure she didn't know she needed. I asked why 4 days before our anniversary felt like the right time for closure. She cried then, loudly, uncontained. She said I was being unfair. That timing didn't work like that. That emotions didn't respect calendars. I remember thinking how strange it was that she was angry with me. I told her I was ending the marriage. That was when things changed. Her reaction didn't look like regret. It looked like panic wearing rage as armor. She went from sobbing to shouting in seconds. She accused me of throwing everything away over one night. She said I was cold, unreasonable, that I'd never really fought for us anyway. She said things that didn't match the situation, like she was arguing a different case she'd prepared for years. When I told her I needed space, she blocked the door. When I asked her to move, she laughed. That laugh is still with me. She said I was overreacting, that no one ended a marriage over something like this, that I'd regret it, that I'd come crawling back once reality set in. I packed a bag that night while she followed me from room to room, swinging between apology and threat. She called me names I didn't recognize as mine. She told me I'd ruin her life, then told me she loved me. When I left, she screamed so loudly a neighbor texted to ask if everything was okay. I didn't respond. I drove until the sky went dark and the road felt neutral again. By the time our anniversary arrived, I was sleeping on a friend's couch, eating whatever was easiest, and learning how quiet a life can get when the future you planned has nowhere to land. That was the beginning, not the worst part, just the beginning. The days after I left blurred together in a way that felt artificial, like my body kept moving while my mind lagged behind. I stayed with my friend Aaron at first. He lived alone, didn't ask many questions, just cleared out his guest room and told me to stay as long as I needed. That sentence mattered more than I admitted. I gave him the short version the first night. No details, just enough to explain why I'd arrived with a duffel bag and nowhere else to go. He listened without interrupting, which was exactly what I needed. Claire didn't give me space. The first text came before midnight. Then another. Then a call. I silenced my phone, but it kept lighting up the room like a warning signal. By morning, there were long messages waiting, some apologetic, some furious, some contradicting each other so badly they felt written by different people. She said she was scared. She said I was overreacting. She said Evan meant nothing. She said I was cruel for leaving. She asked me to come home so we could talk like adults, as if what she'd done was a misunderstanding we could tidy up with the right tone. I didn't reply. Silence made her angrier than anything else. By the third day, she showed up at Aaron's place. I hadn't told her where I was staying, which meant she'd either guessed or gone through my contacts. When the doorbell rang, Aaron looked at me first. I nodded. She rushed past him the moment she saw me, standing too close, dropping her voice like intimacy was still hers to use. "This is ridiculous," she said. "You're punishing me." I told her she needed to leave. Her calm shattered into something sharper. She accused me of humiliating her, of planning this, of never really loving her. When Aaron stepped in and told her to go, she turned on him like he'd betrayed her. Before she left, she said, "You're going to regret this." Evan wouldn't have left. That was the moment I knew there was nothing left to save. That night, I cried for the first time. Quietly. Not over her, exactly, but over how completely I'd misread my own life. I had believed that shared routines meant shared values, that the absence of conflict meant trust. The next morning, I called a lawyer. The consultation felt surreal, answering questions about property and timelines like I was describing someone else's marriage. The attorney listened and told me, calmly, that Claire didn't take the paperwork well. She called screaming, accused me of blindsiding her, said she never thought I was serious. She told me serving papers was a worse betrayal than what she'd done. When I mentioned Evan, she dismissed it as irrelevant. "That's in the past," she said. Why are you obsessed with it? Over the next few weeks, she escalated. She contacted my family, mutual friends, anyone who would listen. In her version, she was remorseful but abandoned. I was cold and unforgiving. The affair was reframed as a symptom, not the cause. Some people checked in. Others stayed quiet. The worst part was the way she swung between apology and accusation. One day she said she missed me and was in therapy. The next, she accused me of emotional abuse for withholding closure. One evening, I found myself parked outside our old house without knowing why. The lights were on. Her car was there. I imagined going inside, ending it face to face. Then I remembered the laugh, the blocked doorway, the comparison. I drove away. Later that night, she messaged me calmly, saying she accepted that I wasn't coming back. Then she added that Evan had reached out again and wanted to talk. I realized she wanted a reaction. Jealousy. Regret. There was none. The divorce moved forward. Paperwork. Logistics. Objects that suddenly didn't matter. I let most of it go. I wanted distance more than fairness. When it was finalized, she mailed the signed papers. No note. Just ink. I thought that was the end. It wasn't. Ending the marriage didn't end her reaction. It made it worse. The first sign that Claire wasn't done came quietly. A mutual friend texted me late one evening asking if I was okay. No context. Just that. When I asked why, she hesitated, then said Claire had been having a hard time and was worried about me. That phrasing felt off. I asked what she meant. She sent a screenshot. It was a post Claire had made and deleted within an hour. Long enough for people to see it. Long enough for opinions to form. In it, she talked about betrayal without naming names. About how abandonment can be just as traumatic as infidelity. About how some people weaponize silence. The comments were split. Sympathy mixed with confusion. A few people asked what happened. A few told her she deserved better. None of them knew they were standing inside a story that wasn't theirs. I felt something then that surprised me. Not anger. Not sadness. Exposure. Like she was pulling the shape of our private collapse into public light, not to clarify it, but to reshape it. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't message her. I told myself it didn't matter. But the pattern escalated. Over the next few weeks, my name started surfacing in conversations I wasn't part of. Friends would bring things up carefully, like they were navigating a room full of glass. Someone asked if it was true I'd emotionally checked out years ago. Someone else asked if I'd really told Claire she was replaceable. I hadn't. I started to realize she wasn't just reacting. She was rewriting. She emailed me one afternoon with a subject line that read, "Please read." The message was long, composed, and unsettlingly calm. She said she'd been reflecting, that she now understood her actions didn't happen in a vacuum, that she felt erased by my detachment, that Evan hadn't been the problem, but the symptom of a marriage where she felt invisible. Then came the line that shifted everything. She wrote that if I continued refusing to engage, she would have no choice but to tell her side more fully. It wasn't explicit, but it didn't need to be. I forwarded the email to my attorney. That was the first time the word harassment entered the conversation. Claire began contacting my workplace, not directly accusing me of anything, just checking in, asking if I was okay, telling my supervisor she was worried about my mental health, framing it as concern. My supervisor called me into his office, uncomfortable, confused. He asked if everything was all right at home. I felt something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't grief anymore. This was control. I sent Claire one message. Short, measured, advised by my attorney. I told her all communication needed to go through legal channels, that any further contact would be documented. Her response came within minutes. She accused me of silencing her, of threatening her, of proving everything she'd been saying about my emotional cruelty. Then she showed up again, this time at my office parking lot. I saw her before she saw me, standing near my car like she belonged there. When I approached, she smiled, relieved, like we were meeting for lunch. "You can't just cut me out of your life," she said softly. "That's not how marriage works." I reminded her we were divorced. She laughed, shaking her head. "Legally, maybe, but emotionally, you don't get to decide that alone." People were watching. Co-workers walking by. She knew it. I told her to leave. She stepped closer instead. "You're really going to do this?" she asked. "After everything we had?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I repeated myself and walked past her. She followed me to my car, crying loudly now, saying my name over and over like it was a plea and an accusation at the same time. Security intervened. That incident changed the tone of everything. After that, the messages stopped. The posts slowed. The quiet returned, but it wasn't the same quiet as before. It was the kind that hums with unresolved energy, like something waiting for permission to detonate. Then came Evan. He emailed me. He said he wanted to apologize, that he hadn't known Claire was still married in any meaningful way, that she'd told him things were basically over, that he never intended to hurt me. I read it twice. I didn't reply. A week later, I heard from someone else that Claire and Evan were officially together. Public this time. Photos, captions about fate and second chances, comments celebrating their courage. I stared at one photo longer than I meant to. Not because of them, but because of what it confirmed. She hadn't lost control. She'd lost access, and she couldn't stand it. The final incident came unexpectedly. A letter arrived at my apartment. Handwritten. No return address. Inside, she'd written that she forgave me, that she hoped one day I'd take responsibility for my part, that she was moving forward with someone who chose her every day. She ended it by saying she hoped I found peace, but that peace required honesty. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a drawer with the others. Not as evidence, as reminder, because what I understood then, fully, was this. Her reaction had never been about losing me. It was about losing the version of me that stayed quiet. And once that version was gone, she didn't know who she was speaking to anymore. That was the moment I stopped waiting for closure and started rebuilding something that didn't need her understanding to exist. After everything settled into legal silence, I expected relief to arrive. That was the promise people kept making. Once it's over, you'll feel lighter. Once she stops contacting you, you'll heal. Once time passes, it won't sting the same way. They were wrong in small, but important ways. What arrived wasn't relief. It was space. And space is uncomfortable when you're not used to it. For the first time in years, no one was watching how I moved through my own life. No one was reacting to my tone, my timing, my decisions. There were no negotiations disguised as conversations. No emotional weather systems I had to monitor just to keep the house calm. I moved into a small apartment across town. Nothing special. Clean. Quiet. Windows that faced east, which meant the mornings came in gently whether I was ready or not. I bought furniture slowly. A bed first. A table. A chair I actually liked instead of one we'd compromised on. Every purchase felt deliberate, almost ceremonial. Like I was reintroducing myself to myself. At night, the silence was the hardest. Not because I missed her voice, but because I no longer had a distraction from my own thoughts. They came back in waves. The good memories didn't hurt as much as the neutral ones. Grocery shopping together. Folding laundry. Sitting on opposite ends of the couch, phones in hand, comfortable in what I thought was shared peace. I started therapy at my sister's urging. I didn't resist. I didn't know how to carry everything alone, and I was tired of pretending I could. In those sessions, I learned something unsettling. I hadn't ignored red flags. I had explained them away. I'd confused emotional intensity with honesty, familiarity with safety. I'd believed that being chosen once meant being chosen continually, without requiring maintenance or accountability. The therapist didn't demonize Claire. She didn't absolve her either. She focused on me, on why I'd stayed calm even when something felt off, on why I'd been so certain that endurance was the same thing as strength. That distinction changed everything. Around that time, people began filtering back into my life in unexpected ways. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just small reconnections. A former coworker reaching out for coffee. A neighbor inviting me to a casual dinner. Friends I hadn't seen much during the marriage, now less hesitant, less cautious. No one asked for details unless I offered. Most didn't need them. I realized how much energy I'd spent insulating my marriage from outside influence. How subtly isolated I'd become without ever noticing. One evening, months later, I ran into someone Claire and I used to socialize with regularly. He hesitated when he saw me, then apologized. I should have checked in sooner, he said. I didn't know what to say. I told him it was okay. And I meant it. Because I wasn't angry anymore. Not at him. Not even at her. In the way anger usually shows up. What I felt was clarity. And clarity doesn't need witnesses. The strangest moment came one afternoon when I realized I hadn't thought about Evan in days. Not consciously. Not unconsciously. He'd gone from symbol to footnote without me noticing the transition. That felt like progress. I dated a little. Carefully. Honestly. I was upfront about where I was and what I wasn't ready for. Some connections faded quickly. A few lingered. None felt like escape routes, which mattered more than chemistry. I learned how to sit across from someone and stay present without bracing for impact. And slowly, almost without ceremony, I stopped checking for messages that would never come. Claire faded into a story I could recount without my pulse changing. Not because it didn't matter, but because it no longer defined the edges of my life. The last thing I did before fully closing that chapter was delete the folder of saved emails and screenshots I'd kept just in case. Not out of forgiveness. Out of trust in myself. I didn't need proof anymore. I knew what happened. And more importantly, I knew what I'd done with it. By the time the next anniversary date rolled around, 1 year later, I didn't mark it. I didn't avoid it either. It passed like any other day. Quietly. Honestly. That night, I sat on my balcony with a drink I didn't rush through, watching the city lights blink on one by one. I thought about how easily a life can split into before and after, and how rarely the after looks like what you feared. What I didn't know yet, what I couldn't have known, was that the real resolution wasn't behind me. It was still forming, and it would arrive not with noise, but with choice. The resolution didn't arrive with a confrontation or a message or some cinematic moment where everything snapped into place. It came quietly, the way most real endings do, disguised as a choice that didn't feel dramatic at all. It started with a phone call I almost didn't answer. The number was unfamiliar, but local. I let it ring once before picking up, already prepared to hang up if it felt wrong. On the other end was a woman named Julia, an attorney I didn't recognize at first. She spoke carefully, professionally, and told me she was calling on Claire's behalf. My chest tightened out of habit. She explained that Claire was preparing to relocate out of state. New job, new start. She said there were a few remaining logistical items to resolve, minor financial loose ends, shared records, things that technically required my acknowledgement. Nothing contentious, nothing urgent. Then she added, she asked me to pass along that she hopes this can be handled cleanly. She wants closure. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the word had finally lost its power. I told Julia that was fine, that she could send whatever needed signing, that I preferred to keep things strictly through counsel. She thanked me and hung up. When the call ended, I didn't feel shaken. I didn't feel victorious either. What I felt was neutral, and that neutrality told me something important. That evening, I went for a walk without headphones. No music, no podcast, just the sound of my own steps and the city settling into itself around me. I realized I wasn't rehearsing conversations anymore. I wasn't imagining what I'd say if I ran into Claire or Evan or anyone connected to that version of my life. The story had stopped looping. A few weeks later, the documents arrived. I signed them, scanned them, sent them back. Done. No commentary. No message attached. That was the last direct interaction I ever had with anything connected to the marriage. I heard later, indirectly, that Claire did move. That she and Evan didn't last. That she told people she'd grown a lot from the experience. That she described our marriage as something that taught her what she didn't want. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't need to. Because by then, my life was no longer built in response to hers. The real resolution came one Sunday morning when I woke up and realized I felt content before remembering why. No spike of anxiety. No background tension. Just a calm awareness of where I was and who I'd become. I made coffee. I sat by the window. I let the day arrive at its own pace. Later that afternoon, I met someone I'd been seeing for a while. Not a relationship yet. Not a distraction either. Just honest company. We talked about work, about travel, about nothing in particular. At one point, she asked me something simple. Do you trust yourself? I didn't answer right away. Then I said yes. And I meant it. That was the thing I'd lost in the marriage and hadn't realized until it was gone. Not trust in her. Trust in myself. In my instincts. In my right to walk away when something crossed a line, even if it looked acceptable from the outside. I had learned that betrayal doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly, wrapped in familiarity, asking you to doubt your own reaction more than the act itself. And I had learned that leaving doesn't make you cruel. It makes you honest. The anniversary that once felt like a marker of loss had become just another date on the calendar. The house I once shared was no longer mine, and neither was the future I'd imagined inside it. But the future I was building now felt sturdier. Not because it was perfect, because it was mine. I don't hate Claire. I don't wish her harm. I also don't carry her story anymore. What she did mattered. What I did next mattered more. And when I look back now, I don't think about the stranger on my porch, or the laugh in the doorway, or the chaos that followed. I think about the moment I chose myself without needing permission. That was the ending. Everything after that was just living.